The New York City Department of Education Division of Human Resources Training in the Needs of Students with Autism. Module 3, Characteristics. In this module, we will focus on some of the common characteristics of students on the autism spectrum. After completing this module, participants will know some of the common characteristics of students on the autism spectrum. The brain and autism. Let's look at a quick video from the McGovern Institute for Brain Research at MIT, explaining the brain basis of autism.
I'm Nancy Canwisher, and I'm an investigator at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research. Until recently, it's been very difficult to study the neural basis of cognition because this was sort of thought to happen all over the brain in a kind of disorganized way. It was very controversial whether high-level aspects of cognition, thinking, are organized into compartmentalized separate bits. Years ago, I had a really brilliant graduate student named Rebecca Sachs who said that she wanted to look for brain regions that are involved in how we think about what another person is thinking. And I thought that was a pretty cool question, but I just didn't believe for a moment that the brain had specialized regions for things that are that abstract. And boy, was I wrong. The region of the brain that's selectively involved in thinking about what another person is thinking is a prime candidate for a region that would be affected in autism.
Hey, y'all.
As best as anybody can tell, the core deficit in autism is one of being able to understand other people's thoughts.
Oh, yeah, watch the movie, yes.
Nancy's the perfect example of someone who spent her whole life understanding human cognition and in recent years applying brain imaging technology to understanding human cognition.
You ready? Good.
And now she's going to take a battery of these tests to get that very basic understanding of what is it that's going wrong in the brains of these kids suffering from autism.
Hi. I think when Jackson was about 2, when most parents are expecting their children to start making sounds and say words, he said a couple things. He said kitty and he said daddy. He never actually lost any language, but he just didn't gain any more words than that. I think those signs were enough as an educator for me to know that there was something up. You hear things about, children who are on the autism spectrum who just love street signs or just love music. He loves everything.
I love books. They are really fun to read. I've recently read Diary of a Wimpy Kid book 3.
When we walked into the McGovern Institute, he was just flabbergasted. I think he wanted to go out and come back in again because he just didn't know what to think about it. And then he just got comfortable there very quickly. What was nice about the passport for Jackson was he could have something tangible.
This is when I got my brain scan and there's a picture.
Something to carry around with him all day.
It's an x-ray view it's kind of like an x-ray view into my body when I hold it up like this.
Scanning any kids is tricky. It's right at the edge of what you can do in neuroscience research.
They're looking for they're looking for keys of autism inside my brain. It's pretty freaky.
I tell everybody that we are at MIT doing this because the finger is on the pulse there. The fact that we could go in and get a picture of his brain, where else can you do that?
Do you think what you're doing is going to help some other kids?
Yeah, I know. I know it will help.
We're hoping that we'll discover not just a characterization of this disorder and what it looks like, but that we'll also discover distinct subtypes of autism. And if we can discover that there are 3 or even 10 different kinds of autism, that will be major progress. Autism is an incredibly complex disorder that just isn't understood at all. So this is a much harder problem than anything I've tried to do before. On the other hand, the stakes are higher. It really matters.
Let's listen to a quick exchange between colleagues regarding the autistic brain.
Okay, so I'm beginning to have a better understanding of how autism spectrum disorder is diagnosed, but I'm still a little confused about how they may actually feel or manifest.
Well, there are several theoretical frameworks or researched ideas about how the brain may function or things that may impact a person with autism.
That's right. There's three major theoretical frameworks. The first was theory of mind, then central coherence, and executive function, correct?
That's correct, John. The overview of theory of mind indicates that it refers to a person's ability to infer another person's mental state. This might include how they feel, what or why they think, or how they might react. A person who struggles with these things might have difficulty in typical social situations.
That's right. In addition to that, the central coherence framework can also be called weak central coherence, which refers to a person's ability to see the bigger picture. A person who struggles with this might focus on details and not apply information outside the specific facts or information presented. They may not be able to recognize or generalize information to include prior knowledge or related knowledge. Nicole, what was the last framework again?
That was executive functioning. And executive functioning refers to how a person's brain can organize, categorize, and process information. Typically, it's associated with the frontal lobe of the brain, and people with weaknesses in their frontal lobes, for example, may have trouble organizing their thoughts, language, or even physical materials. And they may also struggle with flexible thinking or might have a difficulty controlling impulses.
Okay, I think I'm beginning to understand the frameworks, but how about we dive a little deeper into each one?
Let's go.
Theoretical frameworks. Theory of mind. The following is a quote from Autism and Theory of the Mind from Caltech from January 2019. Suppose you are helping your friend search for their missing phone, and while they are looking around another room, you find it behind some cushions. When they return, you seize the opportunity to play a prank on them and pretend the phone is still missing. You're able to envision this prank because you know that their understanding of the world is separate from what you know to be true. The statement above is an example of theory of mind, the ability to understand other people's beliefs, preferences, and intentions as distinct from one's own. It's the ability to think about the thoughts, feelings, and intentions of others. Mind blindness is a theory initially developed in 1990 that explains people with autism as having a lack or developmental delay of theory of mind, meaning they are unable to attribute mental states to others. Children with autism may not do this type of thinking fluidly. They may not always use this information to inform social interactions. For example, Dad has put the car keys on a high shelf. Mom goes to look for the keys. The child doesn't understand why the mom just doesn't reach up and get the keys. Here's a video from Parent Lab explaining the concept of theory of mind.
When you play hide and seek with your kiddo, have you ever noticed how they will cover their own eyes and think that makes them invisible? What about when you ask your child to pick out a gift for a parent or sibling, and they choose a toy that they'd like to receive themselves instead of something the other person would want? If your child is around the ages of 2 to 3, you may have noticed any or all of these behaviors. Believe it or not, all of this is expected developmentally. But why? Because these young kids do not yet have a firm theory of mind. Having a firm theory of mind means you understand that other people's thoughts and feelings are separate and different from your own. Early research about theory of mind suggests that kids develop this understanding around the ages of 4 or 5. But new research indicates that kids as young as 18 months can display a theory of mind through their nonverbal actions and communications. An 18-month-old isn't aware of this, of course, but the older they get, the more conscious their intentions will become. Older children might ask, either in their own heads or with another person, how will the teacher react when they find out what I just did? Or will my mom get mad at me for taking a cookie without asking first? The ability to imagine other people's actions and reactions based on past experience gets more sophisticated as we get older and more experienced in our relationships. What can we as parents do with this information? First, we can laugh. When we understand our kids' brains better, we can find more humor as opposed to frustration in their behaviors, even when those behaviors seem selfish or self-serving. We can judge them less too. But of course, we ultimately want them to become compassionate people. So, we can coach our kiddos through tough situations with empathy and help them consider how other people might react to the things they do. If your child has yet to develop a firm theory of mind, they will typically be unable to practice these behaviors consistently or independently until at least 4 or 5 years of age. Even older children need support in considering others' needs and feelings, but showing them these skills early will set your little ones up for future success.
After reassessing other findings from 35 years of theory of mind research in autism, researchers at Ghent University argue that the brains of those with ASD may be able to grasp what others think but may have a more difficult time processing the degree to which others think differently from themselves. While not widely adopted, the new theory also changes our understanding of complex social interactions, such as lie detection, moral judgments, and the understanding of sarcasm and humor. Recognizing that a person is sarcastic, for instance, when they call the weather beautiful while it is raining, may well depend on detecting a mismatch between this person's statement and one's own understanding of the world. If, quote, mind reading is less important than we thought, the relational mentalizing theory spawns many new research questions. Theoretical frameworks, central coherence. In 1989, Uta Frith proposed the weak central coherence theory of autism. Central coherence is the term given to a human being's ability to derive overall meaning from a mass of details. It is the ability to conceptualize the big picture, or gist. A person with strong central coherence, looking at an endless expanse of trees, would see the forest. A person with weak central coherence would see only a lot of individual trees. Here is a video from Lauren Snow explaining the concept of central coherence as it relates to autism.
You might have heard that autistic people tend to focus on the details and can often miss the bigger picture. But what is central coherence, and how does it affect autism? The way people process information will vary greatly from person to person, but in general most people tend to focus on the whole of a situation, or the big picture. This is what's referred to as central coherence. Central coherence is where people subconsciously prioritize certain information that's relevant to them or the situation they're in. This is an intuitive process. This may mean when entering a social situation, you focus on the people that are there and what the people are doing, the things that are relevant to you. Whereas autistic people may be more likely to focus on other things, such as the lighting, the wallpaper, the clothing people are wearing, or other kind of patterns in the environment. Because of this, they may not notice important things. This tendency for autistic people to focus on those finer details is often called weak central coherence, but I like to call it strong specific coherence. There isn't really a problem with that, it's just a different way of seeing the world. The autistic's mind ability to focus on certain details and patterns can be really advantageous in some situations. And it may be possible that as a result of seeing all the finer detail, that you come to a different bigger picture. Most autistic people seem to be good at noticing patterns, but what patterns an individual recognizes varies from person to person. It's even possible that an autistic person might be really good at noticing social patterns, or patterns in vocal tone and facial expressions. This could mean that they're very aware of how others are thinking and feeling, and what's going on between different people. But it's just as likely an autistic person's patterns may focus on something else, something that interests them more, such as a game they like to play, movies they like to watch, the clothes people wear, and pretty much anything. What kind of patterns do you notice? What details do you focus on in a situation?
Another theoretical framework, executive functioning. Executive function is a neurophysical multidimensional concept referring to higher order brain functions or mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and perform multiple tasks successfully. Just as an air traffic control system at a busy airport safely manages the arrivals and departures of many aircraft on multiple runways, the brain needs this skill set to filter distractions, prioritize tasks, set and achieve goals, and control impulses. Executive functioning refers to a person's ability to process information. It includes skills such as organizing, planning, paying attention, inhibiting inappropriate responses. Many people with autism have difficulty with executive functioning. They may have trouble with certain skills like planning, staying organized, sequencing information, and self-regulating emotions. Some pay attention to minor details but have trouble seeing how these details fit into a bigger picture. Others have trouble maintaining their attention in the classroom or other settings. When preparing to do a task, some may find it hard to organize their thoughts and actions in order to figure out what sequence of steps are needed. Here is a video from the YouTube channel Sprouts explaining how executive functioning describes crucial mental processes.
Executive functions are the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. We can distinguish between three components: 1. Working memory, 2. Inhibitory control, and 3. Cognitive flexibility. All three are interlinked and influence each other. Psychologist Deborah Phillips from Georgetown University calls it the air traffic control system of our brain. Like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes departing and landing with perfect timing, we have to manage a lot of information and distractions simultaneously. Without good executive functions, disaster strikes. Let's look at the three different components. The working memory is responsible for processing information. If well developed, it allows us to manage multiple chunks of information at the same time. Complex tasks can be solved and deep ideas understood. Without much of it, our intelligence is limited. Inhibitory control describes our capability to concentrate, regulates our emotions, and controls our behavior during stressful situations. It's an essential skill if we want to change a childhood habit. Without it, we might have trouble controlling our behavior and can come across as weird. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to adapt to new tasks quickly and to change our perspective. If we have little of it, we can't adapt, get stuck in old thoughts, and have tunnel vision. We come across as stubborn and uncooperative. To demonstrate their roles, let's compare two imaginary teenagers, Anne and Jay. Anne is a working memory monster. She can keep lots of ideas in her mind at any given time and mentally buffers digits to calculate them in her head. Even if she gets interrupted or feels a change of emotions, she realizes but is still able to continue what she started. Jay's working memory is tiny. What Anne solves in her head, he has to write down. It's hard for him to read complex sentences or follow a longer train of thought. He gets distracted easily and starts thinking about something else. At school, Anne is an inhibitory control genius. She is fully in charge of her emotions and how they are expressed in her behavior. If a teacher loses his temper, she remains calm and friendly. It's easy for her to focus for long periods of time. As a result, her work is good and the feedback on it is positive. Jay's emotions instantly express themselves in his behavior, which he often fails to control. He can get distracted easily, and hence he has difficulties finishing what he started. His work remains mediocre. This can lead to negative feedback and a lower self-esteem. Anne's cognitive flexibility is great. She can change her perspective and find ways around roadblocks. At school, she adjusts from one subject to another at the speed of light. Jay has difficulty solving problems because his thinking is inflexible. To change his perspective in response to constructive criticism takes a lot of his mental energy. Even simple tasks like switching from talking to listening is hard for him. Others can find this annoying. Executive function develops mainly during the first 5 years of our lives. A caring, playful, and nourishing childhood is our best bet to increase them. Free play trains our inhibitory control, and games practice our working memory. Playing an instrument trains our brain to process the notes and to coordinate the right and left hand simultaneously. If others are listening, we learn to control our emotions. Movement is great as well. In football, each situation is new. Ball possession requires quick decisions and builds cognitive flexibility. One study showed that kids that walked barefoot each day for just 16 minutes improve their working memory, because when they do, they need to keep many things in mind. With a lot of practice as kids, we become real executives of our own mind. This then allows us to excel in teams and help solve some of the world's more complex problems. And since we are able to focus on them for a long period and don't give up easily, success is just a matter of time.
Executive functioning and its impact on the brain. Executive functioning relates to brain processes such as working memory, self-monitoring, planning and prioritizing, task initiation, organization, impulse control, emotional control, and flexible thinking. The brain, of course, is made up of the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord. And all of these sections of the brain perform different tasks for different needs. Let's listen to a quick exchange between two colleagues summarizing theoretical frameworks. Okay, that was a lot of information. Let's think these things through and summarize them together, okay? So the first one we learned about is called theory of mind. According to an article posted in the journal Neuroscientist, theory of mind refers to a person's cognitive capacity and their ability to infer others' mental states.
So, for example, a person with autism may have trouble predicting the behavior of others, especially when someone is not following a logical or expected pattern. So, for example, according to the same article, it states in quotations, in a standard false belief test, an experimenter presents an event in which an object is moved during the absence of a protagonist, and then asks the participant where the protagonist will look for the object. Participants pass a test if they correctly answer that the protagonist will look for the original location of the object, and fail if they choose the current location of the object.
Huh, okay. So basically, trouble with theory of mind is present when a person has difficulty making inferences about how another person may be thinking or feeling or processing, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, the next framework is called central coherence, and it refers to a weakness in being able to see the big picture, so to speak.
Oh, okay. So, for example, then that means that this framework suggests that someone with deficits in this area would focus on small details rather than applying them to a more global idea, right? Like someone
Yes.
looking at a photo of many trees and concluding it's a bunch of singular trees rather than concluding that it may be a whole forest.
Okay, makes sense. So basically, trouble with central coherence is difficulty generalizing and seeing that bigger picture. Wasn't there one more framework mentioned? Executive functioning?
Yep. When I looked this one up, the major thing to remember was that executive functioning refers to how your brain organizes, processes, and categorizes information.
Right. So if someone struggles with executive functions, they may have trouble with flexible thinking, understanding non-literal language, organizing, prioritizing time, monitoring inhibitions, impulses, issues like that.
Wow. Okay. This is a lot of information, but I definitely think I better understand the three major theoretical frameworks.
Neurotypical and neurodivergent. Neurotypical. Neurotypical is a descriptor that refers to someone who has the brain functions, behaviors, and processing considered standard or typical. People who are neurotypical may have no idea that they are if the subject has never come up before. Neurodivergent. Neurodivergence is the term for people whose brains function differently in one or more ways than is considered standard or typical. There are many ways in which neurodivergence manifests, ranging from very mild ways that most people would never notice to more obvious ways that lead to a person behaving differently than is standard in our society. Neurodivergent people are usually made aware that their brains function differently than is typical. A neurodivergent person has one or more ways in which their brain functions outside the quote typical way. For example, neurodivergent people may be diagnosed with autism, ADHD, OCD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, or Tourette's. Autism and neurodiversity. In this video, Adriana White discusses the idea of neurodiversity. She offers awareness and an alternative way to see people as unique and valuable, regardless of their neurodiversity.
We all know someone who's a little weird. Someone who's a little too eager, a little too enthusiastic. Someone who doesn't get the hint when you want a conversation to end, so you have to plan your escape. Someone who might think that you're on closer terms than you actually are. Someone who has very specific interests and thinks that you are just as interested in all the same things that they like. We all know someone like this, right? We all know someone who's a little awkward. But what if I told you that some people who strike you as weird or awkward, they're not suffering from any kind of moral or character flaw? What if I told you that some people seem different to you because they are literally wired differently? Conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and Tourette syndrome all fall under the umbrella of something called neurodiversity. The people who have these conditions are united by the fact that their brain structure is physically different. And that difference in wiring leads to different ways of thinking, communicating, and experiencing the world. One of the main ideas behind neurodiversity is that different does not mean broken. The term was created by a sociologist named Judy Singer in the 1990s to refer to the infinite and naturally occurring variability of the human brain, because we all have our own unique neurology, and with it our own strengths and weaknesses. The problem for a lot of neurodivergent people is that the world we live in was created with neurotypical brains in mind. And as a result of this, neurodivergent people have to put in extra work, constantly translating their thoughts and ideas and experiences from one frame of reference to another.
How might executive functioning present itself in autism? Executive functioning impairments can present as forgetting to pack a school bag or packing the wrong things, difficulty organizing a calendar, struggling with homework, such as losing, forgetting, or not completing, difficulty recognizing a task that needs to be done, the inability to begin or complete a specific task, struggling to break a task into smaller steps, forgetting or chronically running late for appointments, constantly misplacing items, difficulty establishing sound hygiene routines, such as accidentally or purposefully skipping baths, showers, or grooming, inability to drive without GPS, difficulty self-monitoring or figuring out what is wrong in one's environment or body, forgetting or mixing up practical instructions, such as directions or household chores, difficulty keeping up in conversations, or forgetting names and/or faces. How might executive functioning be affected by autism? Executive functioning impairments are affected by autism in the following ways: language delays, slower processing, literal language, unusual prosody, such as rhythm and intonation, echolalia, or the pathological repetition of what is said by other people, use of scripting, or missing nonverbal language. How might social navigation be affected by autism? According to autismspeaks.com, social skills are the rules, customs, and abilities that guide our interactions with other people and the world around us. Generally, people pick up social skills in the same way they learn language skills, naturally and easily. Over time, they build a social map of how to act in situations and with others. For people with autism, it can be harder to learn and build up these skills, often forcing them to guess what the social map should look like. Social navigation impairments are affected by autism in the following ways: a discomfort with eye contact, a difficulty with initiating and reciprocity, a difficulty reading peers, a difference in perspective taking, and a preference for adults. How might social emotional regulation be affected by autism? Emotional regulation or self-regulation is the ability to monitor and modulate which emotions one has when you have them, and how you experience and express them. A child's capacity to regulate their emotional state and emotional reactions affects their family, peers, academic performance, long-term mental health, and their ability to thrive in a complex world. Social emotional regulation impairments are affected by autism in the following ways: black and white thinking, poor self-awareness, literal language, difficulty identifying emotions, easily frustrated, anxiety, increased benefit from breaks. Communication differences and challenges experienced by people with autism. In this video, Ambitious About Autism's youth patrons explain some of the communication differences and challenges experienced by people with autism.
Sometimes I do find it difficult to talk to people, but then again, sometimes I find it really easy to talk to people, but it just depends on what mood I'm feeling or how I'm feeling in up here.
When a day has gone bad, I find myself at points I can't speak, not very well at least.
I sometimes take things quite literally, with often hilarious consequences, to be fair. Things like sarcasm and metaphor. Like, I understand logically how they work, but might struggle to pick it up in the moment.
I try to study people's behaviour and try to study people's thoughts and actions, and I just never know exactly what to do. And sometimes I find that I say something that will sound accidentally really blunt or insensitive, and I won't know until the person becomes very evidently cross with me.
I've been using my hands for the past few minutes, so I like that because I don't know why, it's just something I do.
Take your time and get to know them, ask maybe like one question at a time.
I need quite a lot of processing time to be able to understand information that I've been told or information that I've been reading, so I don't get overwhelmed and overloaded and then don't remember anything.
How might sensory and motor skills be affected by autism? Sensory issues are common in people with autism and are even included in the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder. People with autism can experience hypersensitivity, over-responsiveness, and hyposensitivity, under-responsiveness, to a wide range of stimuli. Most people have a combination of both. Children with autism often have problems developing motor skills, such as running, throwing a ball, or even learning how to write. Sensory and motor experience impairments are affected by autism in the following ways: hypo and or hyperreactive, self-stimulatory behaviors, poor motor control, muscle weaknesses, and difficulty with motor planning. How are behaviors and interests affected by autism? Repetitive, apparently purposeless behaviors and obsessive, highly selective, and rigid interests are described as symptoms of autism in the DSM-5. Repetitive behaviors in autism can vary radically from person to person. These behaviors are called stereotypy or perseveration. Different types of stereotypy and perseveration are present in other neurological conditions as well. Stereotypy refers to the persistent repetition of an act. Perseveration refers to the persistent repetition of words, phrases, or details that have been vocalized before. Sometimes, perseverative or stereotypy behaviors are obvious because they are unusual, such as rocking back and forth for long periods, repetitively opening and closing doors, or rapidly shaking the head back and forth. Autistic perseveration may not be obvious to the casual observer. For example, a person with autism may ask, "Do you like Marvel movies?" If you say yes, he or she may run through the same speech about Iron Man that they've recited 10 times before, in exactly the same words and with exactly the same tone and gestures. Behaviors and interests are affected by autism in the following ways: stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects, or speech. This includes simple motor stereotypes, lining up toys, flipping objects, echolalia, idiosyncratic or unusual phrases. Echolalia refers to when a person with autism repeats the words or noises they have heard someone else make. Insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. This includes extreme distress at small changes, difficulty with transitions, rigid thinking patterns, greeting rituals, and the need for the same route or food every day. Highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. This includes a strong attachment to or preoccupation with an object. How is one's general cognitive profile affected by autism? A cognitive profile is an individual's pattern of relative strengths and difficulties across several cognitive domains. One's general cognitive profile is affected by autism in the following ways: visual strength, logical, literal, fact-oriented, collecting, organizing, and ordering, difficulty with abstraction, hyperlexia, or precocious reading ability accompanied by difficulties in acquiring language, weak problem solving, and difficulty with multitasking.